Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Neil Woodrow. Here are today's top stories. Travellers entering the UK from high-risk countries will face a huge hotel quarantine bill and 2 tests. Beijing refuses to recognise dual nationality of Hong Kong residents, even if they have a British passport. Oxford University is renaming a prestigious professorship for a donation from a Chinese company. The UK government announces that travellers entering the country will be charged £1,750 for a 10-day hotel quarantine. Those who flout the rules will face hefty fines. NTD's Earl Rhodes has more.
On their arrival, travellers from the UK and Ireland will be escorted to their quarantine hotels if they have been in high-risk countries in the last 10 days.
Before they travel, they'll have to book through an online platform and pay for a quarantine package costing £1,750 for an individual travelling alone, which includes the hotel, transport and testing.
While in quarantine, travellers will have to take 2 PCR tests, and if they test positive during their stay, will need to quarantine for longer.
Any positive result will automatically undergo genomic sequencing to confirm whether they have a variant of concern.
The UK government will strongly enforce this new arrangement. Individuals and airlines that flout the rules will face huge fines.
Passenger carriers will have a duty in law to make sure that passengers have signed up for these new arrangements before they travel and will be fined if they don't.
Travellers will only be allowed to enter the UK through a small number of ports. They must also provide their contact details and their UK addresses.
Anyone who lies on the passenger locator form and tries to conceal that they've been in a country on the red list in the 10 days before arrival here will face a prison sentence of up to 10 years.
Travellers failing to take a mandatory test will face a £1,000 penalty. If they fail to take the second test, the penalty will be doubled. For those who fail to quarantine in a designated hotel, the fine will be £10,000. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
The UK's COVID-19 app has told 1.7 million people in England and Wales to self-isolate to date. The app advises close contacts of someone who tests positive to isolate. Health officials say it's the fastest way to notify them. It can take as little as 15 minutes after a user inputs a positive test result. At over 21 million downloads, 56% of the eligible population aged 16 and over and with a smartphone have taken interest in the app. It was the second most downloaded free iPhone app on the Apple App Store in 2020. A group of Conservative MPs are accusing government ministers of engineering a vote, forcing them to accept a compromise. The vote on the Genocide amendment could prevent trade agreements with countries the High Court rules guilty of genocide. But ministers combined the amendment with another one, blocking MPs from voting from it as a single proposal. The Genocide amendment has become a test for the government's policy towards China. The US recently declared that China is committing genocide against Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. The British Consulate General has been informed that Hong Kong, like other parts of China, does not recognise dual nationality. Based on UK government travel advice, dual nationality citizens may be treated as a Chinese citizen by local authorities even if they enter Hong Kong on a British passport. That means the British Consulate General may not be able to offer any consular assistance. Just before warning the UK, the Hong Kong government halted international diplomats from offering assistance to Chinese dual citizens with foreign passports who had been arrested or detained in the city in certain cases. There are hundreds of thousands of dual Chinese nationals in Hong Kong. Until now, they were able to work in the city while maintaining family links overseas and vice versa. The warning brings new uncertainty to their lives. Oxford University is to rename a prestigious professorship of physics after Tencent, a Chinese software company, for £700,000 donation. According to the Daily Mail newspaper, the university's Wykeham Chair of Physics will be renamed the Tencent-Wykeham Chair of Physics. The professorship was established in 1900 and is named after William of Wykeham, the bishop who founded New College in the 14th century. Tencent is accused of having close links with the communist regime in China. According to the CIA, Tencent was founded with state support and financing from China's Ministry of State Security. Tencent also owns the app WeChat. The Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, sentences a 16-year-old teen from Cornwall for terror offences he committed beginning at age 13. According to CPS, he was given a 24-month youth rehabilitation order, which is a community sentence with strict requirements. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of disseminating terrorist publications and 10 counts of possessing such publications. The boy was also the British head of an international online neo-Nazi group. He claims that he wanted to appear cool, but the body of evidence led to him pleading guilty. Driven by high demand during lockdown, the online share of Britain's grocery sales hits a record in January. New research shows 1 in 3 of all British households shopped online. Market researcher Nielsen says British consumers spent £1.4 billion on groceries online in January. That's more than double of January the 1st last year. Half of that comes from new online shoppers. The research shows Morrisons, Britain's 4th largest supermarket group, saw a growth of over 10% in January, becoming the best online performer of the country's big 4 grocers. Britain Joanna Contour abruptly retires from the Australian Open during her first round. Konta, who was ranked 15th in the world, left the court in the opening set for a medical timeout to get treatment on her abdomen. She came back to serve out the set, but continued to struggle and lost the first 2 games of the second set before deciding she was unable to continue. Up next, hairdressers in Austria are reopening, but appointments require a negative COVID-19 test result. That and more news from Europe when we return. In France, the media is reporting an increase in the number of squatters. NTD's France correspondent David Vivers spoke with a man who was struggling to evict a couple from his own home.
In June 2019, Gregory Deck's life took a turn. His house in a Paris suburb was illegally occupied by a couple. Since then, he's been lodging in his friend's home.
These people have been convicted guilty. I still can't go back home. I don't trust the law anymore. I feel abandoned.
Paying all his rent plus the lawyer and the bailiff, Deck is left with no money and fears he'll end up living on the street. French media have reported several similar cases in the last month. On Monday, squatters took over an 88-year-old man's house in the south of France. He struggled to evict the squatters. Deck said the law advises him not to go back home by himself for a risk of facing time in jail.
As the owner of the apartment, I'm not allowed to go back there, no matter what. How serious is that? This situation happens in other places, squatters taking over people's lives. How serious is that? It's extremely serious. I'd like to take my life back.
The French government changed the law in January to allow quicker evictions, but it still protects the squatters during winter breaks. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Germany, Poland and Sweden expelled 3 Russian diplomats on Monday. It comes after Moscow expelled 3 diplomats from the 3 EU countries last week. Russia accused them of taking part in protests against the jailing of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The expulsions happened as the EU's top diplomat visited Moscow. The EU on Monday defended Josep Borrell's visit that was aimed at seeking Navalny's release. Moscow called the EU's actions unjustified and unfriendly. A Syrian migrant is running for a seat in the German parliament 5 years after fleeing the civil war in Syria. Earl Rhodes has the details.
Tarek Al-Aus is aiming to become the first Syrian migrant elected to the German parliament, the Bundestag. If he becomes an MP, he says he wants to be a voice for refugees and migrants.
I would like to use my voice in the Bundestag to represent the hundreds of thousands of refugees here in Germany and work for a diverse and open society.
He arrived 5 years ago with over 1 million other migrants and refugees during the European migrant crisis. He learned German in 6 months and now works as a social worker. He also founded an NGO, lobbying for migrants crossing the Mediterranean like he once did.
I'm specifically concerned with the living conditions and housing situation of refugees, the camps and the situation at the external borders on the Greek islands.
He is running for the opposition Green Party. Observers see the Greens as a likely part of the next ruling coalition after the federal elections in September. He's hoping to get his German citizenship in time to be eligible. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
Many Spanish doctors and nurses are suffering the mental after effects of dealing with CCP virus patients. For some, issues like high death rates are triggering mental illness.
Richard Belmonte is a nurse and he hasn't treated a COVID patient for 8 months. But the mental trauma from working in the intensive care unit at Barcelona's Vall d'Hebron hospital during the first wave of the pandemic still lingers.
When I arrived at the COVID-19 ICU, my first sensation was fear of the unknown. I didn't know what I was facing. Colleagues who'd arrived before me came out, and I remember the words that one colleague of mine said. This is a battlefield. This is a battlefield.
As the pandemic drags on, the emotional toll for health workers on the front line is receiving increased scrutiny. Spain is one of the worst hit, and the effects aren't always contained to the workplace. In Belmonte's case, it's also more personal. Not only was he forced to live away from his family to protect them from COVID-19, but both of his parents fell ill with the virus. For his dad, the disease was fatal.
My mother and father were in the same room with COVID, and my father didn't make it. I'm angry. I couldn't take care of him because I'm a nurse. I like to take care of people, and I couldn't do it for my father.
A recent study of 9,000 professionals in 18 hospitals in Spain showed that around 45% of healthcare staff there were at high risk of some type of mental disorder after just the first wave of the virus. Depression, anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder were the most common complaints. Belmonte refused counselling, choosing to tackle his struggles with the help of his family instead. Despite everything, he says he would happily treat COVID patients in ICU in the future.
Austrian hairdressers reopened on Monday as the country loosened its lockdown. Ed Yatkin has more.
No matter how desperate they are for a trim, customers have to show a recent negative COVID-19 test to get groomed. Customers at Vienna's N hair salon were ecstatic.
After I haven't been to the hairdresser for 8 weeks or even longer, I simply feel different from when my hair is in a terrible state. It's about the appearance. Even though I live alone, I'm of the belief that a haircut is a necessity to feel well.
Only customers with recent negative virus tests are allowed to come in.
Walk-in customers are not an option because you can no longer come into a hair or beauty salon and say, I'd like to stay quickly for a haircut, because you need a test.
The owner was less enthusiastic about the strict rules.
I'm only allowed 40% capacity. I'm not sure how other people could manage with 40% of their income. Maybe politicians should have a rethink and ask themselves what would happen if they were in our shoes.
Austria's coronavirus vaccination plans relies heavily on the AstraZeneca vaccine, but researchers have found that it provides only minimal protection in young people from the South African variant. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Up next, a study estimates that fossil fuel pollution causes 8 million premature deaths each year. Find out more after the break. According to a new study, pollution from fossil fuels causes 1 in 5 premature deaths globally. The study estimates that it causes over 8 million premature deaths each year. NTD's Joy Dogood has the details.
One co-author from University College London said the hotspots that stand out are
in China and India. And then there are also some locations in the US, like the Northeast US, where there's a lot of fossil fuel combustion, and then in a few spots in Europe as well. But the two countries that stand out as hotspots are China and India.
A team from 3 British universities and Harvard University did the research. They used a high-resolution model to give a clear indication of which kinds of pollutants people are breathing in a particular area.
Where the simulation tells us about all the detailed processes that happen in the atmosphere leading to the formation of air pollution. And so what we could do with the simulation is tease out the contribution from fossil fuel combustion.
Some similar studies reveal more about poor health outcomes from air pollution.
There are many studies that look at health consequences associated with air pollution and finding more and more adverse health outcomes. I mean, loss of eyesight, cognitive ability, dementia.
Murray suggests cleaner sources of energy need to be found fast.
Making that transition more urgent than it perhaps is. We're showing that there is this really large near-term impact of fossil fuels on health.
Prior research from satellites and observations had struggled to separate fossil fuel pollution from other harmful sources such as wildfires. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
Authorities say 31 bodies have been recovered from India's Glacier avalanche. Rescue teams are using helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras to locate the over 200 missing people after part of a remote Himalayan glacier in India's northern Uttarakhand state broke away. A torrent of water, rocks and construction debris was sent down a mountain valley. Authorities say rescue personnel are now using zip lines to reach areas that are cut off. Experts say it snowed heavily last week in the area. It was possible that some of the snow started melting, leading to the avalanche. Winter fun is becoming more accessible for city dwellers in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia during the pandemic. Car-sharing company CityBee makes Vilnius the first city in the world to provide 100 cars with sledges in the boot. Kristijonas Kalkaris is CEO of CityBee.
So now with COVID and isolation, people cannot gather in one spot. So we offer the service, the sledges and the car, to find the isolated areas in our green cities, in Vilnius, Kaunas and Klaipėda. And there are a lot of locations like this where you can enjoy the snow and the sledges.
In order to enjoy the sledge, a client has to use the car-sharing service, but no extra cost is required for the wooden vintage-style sled. Each sledge is carefully disinfected after use. Families with children and also adults say they're enjoying the service. That's all from NTD UK News. See you tomorrow.